They were just shoes. Tiny. Mud-stained. Laces tied in a messy knot, like a child rushing to meet someone who wasn't coming home. But they didn't belong in the trash. Not with the stuffed dog beside them. Not under the rain, soaking into cardboard. Not outside a house that now sat hollow, evicted, emptied, forgotten. Charles Whitmore stared at them as if they'd spoken. He had no idea whose they were. What he didn't know yet was that the boy who wore them hadn't said a single word in 72 days. Charles was always composed. Buttoned up. Clean cut. The kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he owned it by standing still. He wasn't supposed to be here. This eviction was one of dozens this week, just another home flipped, cleared, and prepped for the next investor bid. It was the kind of thing Charles handled with ease. One glance at the numbers, and he'd sign the notice without blinking. But something made him stop today. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was how quiet the neighborhood felt, like it was holding its breath. Or maybe it was those shoes. They sat on top of a flattened cereal box. A ripped SpongeBob sticker clung to the edge of it, like it hadn't quite let go. The movers were nearly finished. A torn couch on the lawn. A cracked tablet. School notebooks soaked and clinging to each other. One had Noah written in blue marker on the front. Charles didn't notice the name. Not yet. He just noticed the shoes. One lace had been tucked inside the heel, not neatly, but deliberately. The other was torn. Still tied. The kind of tie a parent might leave untouched, not ready to undo it. Not ready to accept they were gone. Charles knelt, slowly. His shoes, polished, Italian leather, splashed quietly against the curb as he crouched. He lifted one of the small sneakers. It was heavier than he expected. Inside was a crumpled drawing. Rain-blurred crayon lines. A small house. 2 figures. One had a scribbled-out face. And over the sun, a jagged X. Charles stood up slowly, heart now beating where logic used to live. He wasn't the kind of man to dwell on sentiment. Charles Whitmore, 52, built an empire on efficiency. Raised in foster care, he clawed his way out by staying cold, calculated, always 3 steps ahead. He'd built wealth from other people's chaos. Bought low, sold high. Never asked questions. Never looked back. But that morning, standing in the rain, he broke a rule he hadn't broken in decades. He asked a question. "Who lived here?" he murmured. One of the movers shrugged. "Single dad, I think. Got sick. Cancer or something. Died 3 days ago. Had a kid too. Boy. Young." Charles froze. What happened to him? The kid? The man dropped a box onto the truck bed. Ran off. Police came yesterday. Said child services will find him. But something didn't sit right. Something cold slid down Charles's spine, and it wasn't just the rain. He looked back at the shoes. Someone had placed them together. Not tossed. Not forgotten. As if they were waiting. The next morning, Charles returned. No car. No driver. Just him in a coat that didn't block out the wind the way he thought it would. The trash pile was smaller now. But the shoes were still there. Only now, they'd been moved. They sat neatly beside the stuffed dog, its ear torn, its button eye missing. And tucked into that ear was a note, written in shaky pencil. "I'm sorry I made him die." Charles didn't breathe for a moment. He read the note again. Not because he didn't understand, but because something in those words scraped against an old wound, one he thought he buried long ago. That same voice from childhood, whispering, "You're the reason they left." A neighbor across the street noticed him. "You looking for the boy?" Charles turned. "Do you know where he went?" She shook her head. "Police scared him off. He ran through the back fence. We haven't seen him since." Charles glanced at the shoes again. Then the drawing. And then something inside him, something long dead, sparked. He didn't know what he was going to do. Only that, he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not while those shoes were still waiting by the curb. Because whoever placed them there still believed someone might come back for them. And for the first time in decades, Charles Whitmore hoped maybe they were right. 2 days later, the shoes were gone. Not because someone took them, but because Charles did. He hadn't planned on it. But that morning, as he opened his front door to leave, there they were. Sitting quietly on his doormat. Same shoes. Same frayed laces. Same stuffed dog curled beside them. No note this time. Just silence. It shouldn't have shaken him. But it did. Because no one knew where he lived. And more importantly, someone small had made it there. Charles drove around for hours that day. Not to meetings. Not to auctions. He found himself circling back to the diner down the road from the foreclosed home. Not sure what he was looking for until he parked. And there he was. A boy. Curled up beside the dumpster. Shoes missing. Just socks, wet and clinging to his small feet. Clutching a napkin dispenser like it was a pillow. Charles stepped out of the car, slowly. He didn't want to scare him. But the boy was already awake. Big brown eyes, staring without blinking. Hollow and still. Like he'd been watching for hours. "You're Noah," Charles said quietly. The boy didn't answer. Charles knelt, careful not to crowd him. "You left the shoes." Still nothing. A waitress from the diner peeked out the back door, saw them, and came rushing over. "He's been here since dawn," she said. Wouldn't speak. Wouldn't eat. "We called the police, but they haven't shown yet." Charles looked at her. "Don't." "What?" "I'll take him." The woman frowned. "Are you family?" "No," Charles admitted. "But I'm not leaving him here." At the police station, things didn't go smoothly. "Are you a legal guardian?" the officer asked, eyeing Charles over a stack of paperwork. "No. But I found him. He was alone. Cold. This child just lost his father. That doesn't make you responsible for him." Charles looked over at Noah, who sat in the waiting chair, small, silent, and still dripping rainwater. Then he turned back to the officer. "I want temporary custody until Child Services can place him." The officer raised an eyebrow. "That's not how this works." Charles's jaw tightened. "Then tell me how it does." 3 hours. 5 phone calls. One personal favor from a judge Charles had once helped with a zoning issue. And just like that, the boy who hadn't spoken in 72 days was going home with the man who evicted his father. But Charles didn't know it yet. Didn't know the weight that came with bringing a child into a house too quiet. Noah didn't speak that night. He didn't eat much either. He just sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at his shoes, which Charles had placed carefully by the door. Then, when he thought Charles wasn't looking, he moved them. Side by side. Facing the hallway. As if waiting for someone else to come home. The house was spotless. Too spotless. Noah's drawings, now dry and flattened, sat on the kitchen island, untouched. Charles had no idea how to talk to children. He barely knew how to talk to adults without using bullet points. He tried small things. Offered warm milk. Sat beside him while cartoons played, though neither of them watched. Read the note again, the one tucked in the dog's ear. I'm sorry I made him die. It looped in his mind, like a record scratch from the past. He remembered sitting outside a group home when he was 9. A social worker had promised someone would come. But no one did. He'd waited anyway. That feeling of being returned, again and again, like a library book no one wanted to keep, it never fully leaves you. And now, it sat in his guest room. Wearing wet socks and broken trust. The next morning, something changed. Charles forgot a meeting. Not because his assistant didn't remind him, but because he was too busy making pancakes, the kind with chocolate chips shaped like smiley faces. He'd never made pancakes before. But Noah watched him do it. Silently. Still not speaking. But watching. And when Charles placed the plate in front of him, the boy didn't eat. He reached down, lifted the shoes from beside the door, and placed them right next to his chair. Like he needed them close. Like they were armor. Charles didn't say a word. He just sat across from him, took a bite of his own pancakes, and waited. Later that afternoon, a caseworker arrived. She was polite but firm. We'll begin the placement process tomorrow, she said. There are a few options. Noah's case is being reviewed. Charles nodded. He knew this wasn't permanent. But when she stood to leave, Noah did something unexpected. He reached for Charles's sleeve. Didn't say a word. Didn't cry. Just held on. And for Charles, a man who thought he'd long forgotten how to feel, that single touch cracked something wide open. He didn't know it yet. But this boy was about to change everything. The pancakes were burning. Smoke curled up from the pan, the kitchen alarm screeched, and Charles Whitmore, former titan of real estate, was waving a dish towel in a frantic dance around the smoke detector. Noah sat at the counter, eyes wide. Silent, but smiling. Barely. For the first time in weeks, something in him cracked. Not all the way. But enough. That tiny smile felt louder than any words. Charles had never lived with anyone before. Not since he left the group home at 17. Not through his rise, his money, his empire. His life was stainless steel and silence. A fridge full of bottled water and nothing else. A closet full of tailored suits. No shoes by the door. No crumbs on the floor. No drawings taped to the fridge. Until now. Now the shoes were there, always in the same place. Right by the front door, side by side. Noah placed them there every morning. As if waiting. As if hoping the man who wore the big shoes, the ones who left forever, might walk through that door again. Charles started noticing the details. Noah wouldn't sit at the table unless Charles was already there. He never turned on the light in the hallway. He kept the stuffed dog close even during naps, holding it like a shield. At night, he'd sleep facing the door, one hand still touching the shoes. Charles didn't ask why. He already knew. Because once, long ago, he did the same thing. Only his shoes were older. And no one ever came back for them. The caseworker called again. She spoke gently, like she didn't want to spook the moment. "There's a foster home," she said. "2 towns over. Good people. No other kids right now. He'll have attention." Charles hesitated. "Has he said anything?" "Not yet. But the psychologist says it's common. Delayed speech after trauma. He just needs stability." Charles looked at Noah, who was sitting on the floor, lining up puzzle pieces. Then at the shoes. Still by the door. Then, softly, "Can I request an extension?" That weekend, Charles took Noah to the park. Not a loud one. Just a quiet corner patch of green near the library. The swings were empty. The sandbox still had leaves in it from last fall. Noah didn't run. He didn't speak. But he sat. And slowly, he began to draw. First a tree. Then a swing. Then 2 stick figures again, this time, both smiling. Charles didn't comment. He just watched. Let him create his own world, piece by piece. And then, just before they left, Noah stood up. Tugged Charles's coat. Held up the drawing. And handed it to him. Still without speaking. But the gesture was enough. Back at the house, Charles was different. He paused during phone calls. Took breaks to eat lunch with Noah. Started canceling meetings he would have once called non-negotiable. And slowly, so slowly, Noah started changing too. He followed Charles from room to room. He began to hum, softly, while brushing his teeth. He stopped sleeping fully clothed. The shoes still waited by the door. But now they were joined by something new, a small pair of rain boots. Bright yellow. A gift from Charles. They weren't worn yet. But they sat beside the old sneakers. Like a future parked quietly next to the past. Then, one Tuesday, everything shifted. Charles was on a video call, zoning permits for a downtown flip, when he noticed it. Silence. Not the usual quiet. But a kind of emptiness. He walked through the house. Checked the kitchen. The hallway. The guest room. Nothing. The shoes were gone. But the boots were still there. Facing the window. A folded piece of paper sat in between. It read, "I don't want to ruin your life again." Panic hit like a tidal wave. Charles raced outside. Searched the street. Called the caseworker. Called the police. Nothing. Hours passed. Noah, the boy he had no legal claim to, the boy who hadn't spoken a single word in over 2 months, was gone. And for the first time in decades, Charles felt real fear. Not the fear of losing a deal. Not the fear of failure. But the fear of losing someone who didn't even know he mattered. That night, Charles sat by the door. Just like Noah used to. Shoes lined up. A stuffed dog beside him. And nothing else but hope. Hope that somehow, he hadn't come too late. Hope that this time, someone would come back. A child's voice breaks silence like sunlight through fog. But not yet. Because even now, even as Charles Whitmore searches alleyways, backyards, schoolyards, anywhere a boy might hide, that voice remains missing. What he doesn't know yet is that Noah hasn't run away from him. He's run towards something. The police tried to reassure him. They called it a typical flight response. Said kids like Noah hide in familiar places. That if he needed help, someone would call. But they didn't know the boy. They hadn't seen the look in his eyes that morning. They hadn't read the note. I don't want to ruin your life again. It played on loop in Charles's mind, louder than any siren, more painful than any loss he'd built wealth to forget. He sat in Noah's room that night. Not to sleep. Just to listen. But there were no footsteps. No creaks in the hall. Just the rain. And the empty shoes by the window. The next morning, he checked the old house again. The foreclosure. The place where the shoes were first found. It was quiet, gutted. A notice stapled to the door flapped in the wind. Inside, there was nothing, no furniture, no pictures. Just dust and shadows. Charles almost turned back. Until he saw it. Drawn in pencil, faint but deliberate, on the inside of the closet wall. A small house. 2 stick figures. One tall. One short. And above them, in shaky letters. Dad. Me. Underneath that. He's nice. I'm scared to stay. Charles's throat tightened. He crouched there, alone, surrounded by memories that weren't his, but felt too close. Noah hadn't disappeared randomly. He'd left something behind. A breadcrumb trail. Then, just before sundown, a call came in. A park ranger. Quiet voice. I think you better come. The cemetery sat on the edge of town. Overgrown, still, barely visited. And there, beneath a sycamore tree, curled beside a headstone, was Noah. Fast asleep. One shoe missing. His small hands clutched the hem of a sweatshirt that didn't belong to him, probably his dad's. Charles didn't speak. He just sat beside him. Waited. And eventually, the boy opened his eyes. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He just whispered, "Is it okay if I stay for a while?" Charles nodded. "As long as you want." They sat there for a long time. No rush. No noise. The headstone was simple. A name, a date, and one line etched in worn stone. He tried his best. Charles stared at it for a while. Because that line, that wasn't written for the world. That was written for a son. And suddenly, it all made sense. The shoes. The silence. The drawings. The note. Noah wasn't running away. He was trying not to burden anyone. Trying to disappear before someone could send him away again. Later that week, they stood in court. The room was cold. Wood-paneled walls. A judge with tired eyes and a pile of cases stacked high. Charles stepped forward. Not as a businessman. Not as a man trying to do damage control. But as someone who had finally learned to care. "I was the one who had his father's home taken away," he said, voice steady but soft. "I didn't ask questions. I didn't read the fine print. I just made it happen." A pause. And when I found the boy, I tried to fix what I broke. But I realized this isn't about fixing. He looked toward Noah, sitting in the front row with the caseworker beside him. This is about showing up. Even when it's hard. Even when they don't trust you. And even when you don't trust yourself. He swallowed hard. I spent my life making people disappear. I don't want to be that man anymore. The judge leaned forward. You understand what full guardianship means? Yes. And if the child refuses to speak again? Charles nodded. Then I'll keep listening. However long it takes. A long silence followed. The kind of silence that normally made Charles uncomfortable. But this one, he waited for. Then, slowly, Noah stood. Walked forward. One hand clutched the stuffed dog. The other reached for Charles's. And just before the judge could speak again, Noah looked up, not at the court, not at the caseworker, but straight at Charles. And softly said, He didn't throw me away. Not like the shoes. The courtroom didn't move. No sound. No coughs. No papers rustling. Just a hush thick with something too big to name. Then the judge smiled. Petition granted. That night, Charles placed the old shoes beside the door. As he always had. But this time, they weren't alone. Next to them, a new pair. Bright blue. One size bigger. Noah's feet were growing. And for the first time in a long time, something else was too. Hope. The last time Charles saw his own father, he was 8. He didn't remember much. Just the clink of a bottle. A slammed door. The sound of his mother crying in the kitchen as social workers loaded him into a car. No shoes packed. No goodbyes. Just a plastic bag with his name written in Sharpie. That was the day he learned what it felt like to be left behind. Now, decades later, he was learning what it felt like to be chosen by a boy who had every reason not to trust him. After the court ruling, life didn't change overnight. But something inside the house did. There was sound now. The thud of socks on hardwood. The scrape of crayon across paper. The tiny shuffle of someone trying to make cereal quietly at 6 a.m. and failing. Noah still didn't talk much. But he didn't need to. He was speaking in other ways now. He left drawings on Charles's desk, always 2 figures, now side by side. He hummed while brushing his teeth. He clung to the stuffed dog less often. And every morning, he still placed the old shoes by the door. But now he added the blue ones next to them, as if honoring the past without being trapped in it. One evening, as Charles tucked him in, Noah looked up and whispered something that stopped time. Why didn't anyone come before you? Charles sat on the edge of the bed, stunned by the question's weight. I don't know, he said quietly. But I wish they had. Noah nodded. Then, after a pause, I didn't think anyone wanted me. Charles bent down, resting his forehead gently against Noah's. I didn't know I needed you. Until I found those shoes. A long breath passed between them. Then Noah whispered, I'm glad you did. In the weeks that followed, Charles started making more changes, not just at home, but everywhere. He canceled 2 evictions. Bought time for families who needed a few more weeks to get back on their feet. He visited shelters. Sat with parents trying to rebuild. Listened to stories he used to ignore. Some of the other investors called him soft. said he was ruining margins. But Charles didn't care. For the first time, he wasn't trying to win. He was trying to make things right. Then one morning, Noah came into the kitchen holding something behind his back. Charles raised an eyebrow. "Whatcha got?" Noah grinned, not a full smile, but enough. He placed the old shoes on the table. The same ones Charles had once found in the trash. Only now, they were clean. Laces rethreaded. Small patches sewn where holes had been. "I want to give them to someone," Noah said. "Someone who needs them more." Charles felt his throat tighten. "They're yours," he said softly. "You don't have to let go of them." Noah nodded. "But someone else is waiting. Just like I was." That same week, Charles met with his board. "I'm selling the company," he announced. Gasps. Protests. Confused looks. He didn't flinch. "I built this empire by being efficient, ruthless, profitable. And in doing that, I forgot the cost. Not just to families, but to myself." He paused. "I don't want to be remembered for towers and eviction notices. I want to be remembered for making a place feel like home even to just one kid." With the profits, he started something new. A foundation. A shelter. Small, quiet, tucked between two old buildings in a part of town no one invested in. It had beds, blankets, a playroom, and right by the door a shelf lined with shoes. Big ones, small ones, mismatched ones. Some still muddy, others brand new. Noah placed his old pair right in the center. "This way," he said, "they know someone came back for them." Charles nodded, watching him. "You're not just giving shoes," he said. "You're giving someone hope." They still lived in the same house. Still had pancake mornings and cartoon marathons. Some nights, Noah still had bad dreams. Still woke up calling softly for his dad. And when he did, Charles didn't say much. He just sat beside him, held his hand, and waited for the shaking to stop. Because healing isn't loud. It's quiet, slow, earned. One day, while they were walking through the shelter, Noah pointed to a little girl in the corner, holding her knees, shoes missing. He tugged Charles's hand. "She's waiting," he whispered. Charles nodded. "I know. It started the same way it always did, with shoes. Tiny ones. Pink. Torn at the heel. Left at the edge of the shelter's hallway, tucked neatly under a cot where a little girl now slept, arms wrapped tight around her own stuffed animal." Charles stood in the doorway, watching. Noah stood beside him, silent but calm, like he had seen this before. He bent down and lined the girl's shoes beside his old pair on the entry shelf. 4 shoes now. 4 stories. 4 reasons to keep going. Charles no longer wore cufflinks. His suit sat in the back of his closet, untouched. These days, his sleeves were rolled up. His mornings started with juice spills and mismatched socks. His calendar no longer centered on closing deals, but on school pickup, toy drives, and local shelter inspections. And strangely, life felt fuller. Not louder. Not easier. But fuller. The kind of full that doesn't come from square footage or bank accounts, but from hearing someone say, "Can I show you my drawing?" before you've even had your first coffee. Noah's drawings now hung in the shelter hallway. Bright ones. Full of color. No more scribbled-out parents. No more excess in the sky. Just trees, swings, animals, and people. People standing together. Some holding hands. Others just smiling nearby. He'd started school again. Slowly. 2 days a week at first. The principal said he was quiet, but kind. Always noticing when someone sat alone. Always ready to share a snack or a smile. He's the kid who watches, she said. But when he moves, it's always toward someone. Charles smiled. He knew why. Noah had been the one waiting. 4 days. 4 weeks. For someone who would move toward him. One Sunday morning, Charles opened the door and froze. The shoes were gone. Not all of them, just the small, tattered pair that had once started it all. The ones Noah had lined up on the shelter shelf like a monument to memory. Instead, in their place sat a simple note. It read, "I think someone else needs them now. I'll be okay." Charles stood there for a long time, holding that note. Letting it sink in. It wasn't just a donation. It was a letting go. And it was earned. Later that night, Noah crawled onto the couch beside him, curling under the blanket they always shared for movie night. "I don't need them to remember him," he said, softly. "He's still in here." He pressed a hand against his chest. Charles didn't speak. Just nodded. And then, like the world had shifted gently into place, Noah rested his head on Charles's shoulder. "Thanks for coming back," he whispered. Charles swallowed hard. "I didn't know I was going anywhere," he said. Noah shrugged. "But you still came back." A few months later, the shelter reached capacity. Families started lining up before dawn. Volunteers came in shifts. And across every wall, artwork bloomed, drawn by children who now had somewhere soft to land. Charles stood at the back one evening, watching a boy help a younger girl tie her shoes. He noticed the shoes. They were the old blue ones, Noah's second pair. Worn down now, but still holding strong. He smiled. These weren't just shoes anymore. They were stories. Footprints of healing. Symbols of someone who chose to stay. That night, Charles sat at his desk with an open journal. He didn't write often, but something about the quiet made the words come easier. Sometimes, he wrote, the thing you throw away is what you needed to find yourself again. He paused. Looked at the framed drawing Noah had given him months ago. 2 figures. One tall. One small. No sun with an X. Just sky. The next morning, as always, Noah placed his shoes by the door. Only now, they were joined by a 5th pair. Even smaller. Red. New. Another child had arrived the night before. She hadn't said a word yet. But her eyes had scanned the room and landed on the shoe shelf first. Like it meant something. Like it told her she wasn't alone. Noah turned to Charles. "Can I show her the art room?" Charles smiled. "Go ahead." Noah paused. "And maybe the pancake trick?" Charles raised an eyebrow. "The one where we burn them?" Noah grinned. "That's the one." And then he was off, socks slipping slightly on the polished floor, laughter trailing behind. Charles stood alone for a moment, shoes lined up neatly beside him. He took a breath. Not the shallow kind. Not the kind that's always waiting for something to go wrong. But a full one. A breath that said, "This is what healing looks like." Not perfect, but enough. Not easy, but real. If this story moved you, you're not alone. Subscribe. We tell stories that remember the forgotten and remind us what it means to come home.